Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast with the world of emerging tech lens. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Technology, Media, and Telecom at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be discussing the latest version of the technology demand indicator. And with me to discuss that are two of the folks who lead that study, Research Director William Eagle and Analyst Malav Parekh. Actually, both of you are returning guests, so welcome back to you both.
Thanks, Eric. It's always great to be on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
And great to have you on, especially when we've got such interesting results that are coming back on. And I guess maybe before we get too far down the road, but maybe a little bit of background for those of our listeners who haven't seen what the tech demand indicator is all about, and a little bit of background about what it is and what we're actually digging into there.
Sure. Happy to provide that. So the tech demand indicator is a representation of intention to spend money on technology in the current and coming quarters among businesses and consumers in the US. So it's based on composite of responses to survey questions about expected spending and about expected changes to spending from folks that are making those kinds of decisions in both business and consumer contexts. And it uses results from surveys that we are conducting and in some cases have been conducting for, up to and beyond 10 years. And in other cases, surveys where we started asking questions specifically designed to support the tech demand indicator. So those signals are kind of weighted to reflect spending in the market, plot the results on a scale from completely negative sentiment, which is 0, to completely positive sentiment, which is 100, with 50 being kind of that inflection point between a general sense of positivity or negativity toward spending. And this is all presented via, an interactive Power BI dashboard, which is a bit of an evolution in how we have represented survey data. And it includes some comparisons to, sort of real world measures, certain S&P indices that track technology markets. And I should also emphasize that for the time being, this is the US tech demand indicator, meaning that the signals are completely focused on responses from US businesses and US consumers. Of course, US tech spending has a big impact on tech companies from outside the country, but that is a limit on the information.
Yeah, the primary focus is the US version of this, although it is one of those things that, especially for those who've seen the earlier versions, who haven't seen the new dashboard, I will point out that now having the ability to really explore this data with a lot more flexibility is, I think, one of the data is good. Don't get me wrong. The interface now is so much more useful in terms of the kind of ways in which you can work with a lot of that data.
I would highlight that as like an important part of this project, right? Is to sort of evolve the way we do some of these things.
Now, but this is, this really has been evolution. This is something that we're now starting to get some depth in terms of the amount of time that we're doing the TDI and where this is headed. But I guess to dive right into it, what are some of the highlights that you're seeing from the most recent results?
This is an interesting time to be having this discussion because we publish results gathered during a quarter at the end of that quarter, which means we're a few weeks away from publishing are the results that we've been gathering during Q2. So the results that we gathered during Q1, we published in April. In that quarter, we saw, an overall positive sentiment toward technology spending, a score of 52.1, which was and I should say that, as I mentioned, it's on a 100-point scale, but for the most part, the aggregate sentiment tends to cluster around, the halfway point. So it rarely exceeds 60 or it drops below 40 or something like that. But we saw this overall positive view toward spending, a score of 52.1. That was the second consecutive quarter in the positive range after more than a year spent in the sort of negative side. And it was also a slight increase over the previous score from Q4 of 51.4. So the Q1 results continue a sort of positive trajectory, which is another interesting aspect of this data that dates back to Q1 of 2023. So it has, for the most part, been, moving in an upward direction since then. We also collect early estimates for the subsequent quarter. So the early estimates for Q2 that we gathered during Q1 suggest that, that curve of intent may flatten out in our upcoming results. And that may reflect, concerns about inflation or interest rates or uncertainty around, global conflict. There's a lot of things that are still kind of exerting pressures on the intention to spend on technology. So our projection for Q2 scores a range, and the primary sort of wedge of that range is between 49.5 and 54.3, so mostly on the positive side. And the extended range is between 47.2 and 56.8. So that window is mostly positive, as I said, but our projection certainly has room for that number to flatten out or to move in a negative direction or even move into the negative range, which would reflect, more of a drag on technology spending growth. I guess the other thing I'll call out here, there were some more positive signals in the part of the sort of section of the research where we look at businesses spending at a very technology specific level. So there we saw some strong signals around things like AI and data analytics, as I have noted you talking about week after week on the podcast. And then also
yeah, well, we held off the mention of AI, for long as we possibly could, but hey, no, now.
And then as you can possibly, as you can probably imagine, also some of the kind of foundational and supporting technologies like cloud infrastructure, information security, things like that.
Well, the information security piece is always strong sentiment there, although there are some other things. We have an upcoming episode that bringing Brennan Daly back to talk about what he sees as maybe some of the hovering indicators that may be bringing some clouds in that area, but again, still pretty positive. But I thought it was interesting also in looking at the data that in fact there are some macroeconomic impacts. And I guess you also looked at sort of how this was the longitudinal results were mirroring some of the S&P activity. There are places there that there's some interesting alignments in that data as well. Malav, you've been looking in some of those aspects, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And like Liam said, that there's been a definite improvement in sentiment. Went from being really weak at the start of 2023 or since the start of 2023 and been on a downward spiral for a long time after sort of peaking early 2022, late 2021. So over the period of time, we've seen that the macroeconomic impact, like inflation and interest rates, has an outsized impact on IT spending sentiment among businesses and consumers alike. And always futile to compare sentiment with revenue projections. Because weak sentiment doesn't necessarily mean weak spending. But what we can say is that sentiment has improved a great deal. It's not really at the peak that we've seen post-pandemic when a lot of organizations move towards digitalization, but it's more pre-pandemic kind of period. And that's why, as Liam also pointed out, that we expect the spending to stabilize. And this is sort of the overall view. But if you go slightly deeper from consumers and the household income of consumers or the type of businesses, you kind of see that how the push and pull of macroeconomics is really, really driving a lot of spending and how businesses are prioritizing them. So we are expecting IT demand to sort of plateau. It's going to be positive or somewhat positive, but it's not really going to skyrocket.
Well, I mean, the important point here is that this is sentiment data. As you're saying, this isn't revenue projections. But I think because of that, that's, I think what's really the really interesting aspect of this is that this is where, the respondents' perspectives are. And so much of that drives spending and planning. And it's those insights, I think, that are particularly interesting in terms of how they correlate with their views of the macroeconomic situation. Yeah, I think, Liam, to your point, there are ongoing spending requirements that are can continue to motor forward their commitments to, infrastructure spend, things that are out there. It's really that feeling about, what's the extent to which I'm going to be looking forward. I'm going to be bumping things up. I'm going to be expecting whether or not it's planning for growth, new capabilities, those sorts of things. It's that really where those expectations are about, but where things are headed.
And this is where the TDI becomes so useful because for vendors, it's a great avenue to see that where the businesses or where their potential, if it's a consumer electronics company, what are consumers, what is the consumer intent, right? By household income or by demographics, like by age. And similarly for business or vendors to businesses, they would helps them figure out, what kind of technologies, what are their needs. And from the macroeconomic point of view, what kind of macroeconomic factors are really driving the consumer or the customer decision making. And these are very valuable. For instance, what we've seen is among consumers, after a long time, there is an improvement or a net positive spending intent, which is 50, almost flat actually, but it's the first time in almost 1.5 years. It's been really positive. And when you look at that, you may think that, wow, the consumer intent is improving. But when you dig deeper, you realize that most of that is driven by the high household income group, right? And those in the lower groups and in the mid groups are actually showing a really, really weak intent to spend on. And that may not really reflect through poor iPhone sales, for instance. What it would mean is that we have those in the high income group continuing to drive sales, and those in the weaker sections only buy need-based and have a longer replacement cycles for devices or reduce spending on buying clothes or ordering food online. So there may be a reduction in discretionary spending. Similarly, for businesses, we expect is a real cut down on discretionary spending and businesses hyper prioritizing, which means that just having a technology or offering a service that offers value is not going to be enough. You have to demonstrate a strong ROI for these businesses. They have to be essential.
That's interesting because it really is this story of this is not one unified economy. This is something where we've got different participants who are operating in different environments, who are spending in different ways in terms of how they're actually approaching this. And I guess that's one of the things that I think is particularly interesting about the TDI tool itself. I touched on this a little bit, the fact that now there's a dashboard capability, but the fact that this is really a much more complex exploration of the current version of the tool actually helps explore, it helps to enable that level of exploration, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that we were kind of hearing as we were developing this tool, which, we've been working on for about a year now. We launched it in Q3 of last year with results from Q3. We launched it around the beginning of Q4. One of the things that we were hearing while we were developing it and while we were kind of testing it and rolling it out was that, yes, this sort of generalized signal around sentiment. And by the way, the discussion we were just having, there's an interesting distinction between intention to spend on technology and enthusiasm for spending on technology or whatever. To Malav's point, sometimes people intend to spend and don't necessarily thrilled about that. So that's the sort of it has to have value. This is important.
Yeah, this is we have to spend. I'm not happy, but all right, we're going to go buy some stuff.
Anyways, sorry for the digression, but I guess one of the things we were hearing was, we want more detail, which as somebody who presents a lot of data findings and survey findings to folks, that's a very, very common response to showing somebody any data at all is, we'd like to see more detail. Do you have more detail about this component of it? But here it was clearly a very important feature. So along with some of our generalized sentiment questions, which we've been gathering, as I said, for years, we started tracking more sentiment around specific areas of technology. So gathering more detail about specific areas of technology spending and what the intention was around that. So probably the biggest change from the last time that, we were on the podcast here was, we now have longitudinal view, even if it's just for a year, for that detailed view of intent. So we can, not only look at, for instance, how does the intent to spend around information security technology compare to intent to spend on, sort of data center technology, but also, how is that shifting from quarter to quarter, or how is that shifting directionally over the last several quarters? And, so we can, each of those things we can, sort of segment out by, vertical market or company size or, a couple of other sort of demographic qualities like that. And we're not seeing wild swings from quarter to quarter. This is as you might expect, but you can see things like the intention around, artificial intelligence, for example, kind of solidifying and edging upward in that kind of ranking. And then the other thing that's actually quite interesting about it is the sort of general consistency over time between the different areas, which tells a bit of a story there too. And then one other thing I would point to as far as how we're evolving the tool or the resource is we recognize this is one signal or one set of signals, and it's one viewpoint into our research. And it touches on topics like some of the things that we've mentioned, artificial intelligence, information security, cloud infrastructure, for which there is a wealth of really high-level expertise within our organization, yourself included. So we've tried to build more hooks into other important areas of research where it's relevant, like treating the tech demand indicator as kind of a jumping off point to a deeper understanding of each of these things that we're sort of highlighting.
I mean, these offer useful perspectives across the whole research arm, because this is the sentiment piece. We've got a lot of perspective on directional aspects of the technology, thoughts about shifts, and especially things like AI, in terms of where they're all going. But while we're talking about AI, how do you see, because it is the hot topic, how do you see AI appearing in the TDI side of things?
So it is important to note that AI, and particularly when we are talking about generative AI, is not really a standalone technology category. We are already seeing that it is playing an important role in each of the tech categories that we have, be it security, customer experience, cloud, or data analytics. While cloud and infosec, as Liam pointed out, are obvious leaders of the spending intent, having AI at sort of a third spot in our sort of ranking shows how much the technology is on top of the mind of organizations. And CX isn't too far behind as well. In fact, it is perhaps the best example of an IT category that is set to be transformed by generative AI in nearly every aspect, be it sales, marketing, and employee experience. And, even from the vertical point of view, by industries, each industry has found their own unique utility for generative AI. For instance, the manufacturing and the consumer packaged goods industry are really keen on the data management and finding these different variables in a data set and identifying patterns, that capability of AI, while finance has a lot of use for the customer service agent assistant or to auto-generate code or predict potential bugs in code, that kind of utility. In terms of customer service agent assistant, we also see use in finance and retail again. So, and of course, software and IT services industry also use it for auto-generating code and data management and automation. So there is a wide variety of use case for singular technology, and a lot of them are on different aspects of the IT spectrum.
Yeah, actually talking about consumer experience or customer experience, Cheryl Kingstone was on the previous episode and was talking a little bit about it. She alluded to this, but it really seems like there's a whole set of different perspectives about which industry verticals see the AI impact in greater extent. And Malav, to your point, they're seeing the use of AI in different areas within their individual businesses and how they're looking at applying it. Interesting. Especially when you start thinking about sort of where all this fits in terms of some of that adoption, some of the adoption planning that's taking place. This really starts to get into some fascinating counterpoints in terms of where these all fit. When you think about what the panel is, well, and actually maybe a little bit of background is useful in terms of really describing where this data gets generated, because we've actually talked about two different panels behind this. Malav, you were talking about the voice of the connected user landscape, which is more consumer-facing technology perspectives. This happens to be that the TDI is looking more at enterprise perspectives, and that draws from our 451 Alliance, which are a set of qualified respondents as part of all of this. And I will also drop in a shameless plug for those on the enterprise side who might be interested in joining, because this is something where, again, if you're involved as a technology decision maker, these are things that you can actually participate in the study and get access to this data directly. That's something I'm sure which both of you would encourage many of our listeners on the enterprise side to do.
Yeah, I mean, if I can kind of amplify that plug and perhaps the shamelessness too. I would say that, obviously we're extremely grateful for the participation of people in the program, but, they very generously give us our time. They take our surveys. In exchange, we give them a view of the data and the insights that we're producing from that effort. So, they're kind of a special community in the sense that they're motivated by the outcome of the work and they're interested in putting in good information. And if anybody listening to the podcast, wants to, find out more about what it would look like to join that, they can go to 451alliance.com and we'd love it if you signed up.
And not surprisingly, I will have a link in the show notes. So all you have to do is scroll down to the bottom of the show notes. There is a link there to express your interest and get signed up for the qualification interview process to join the panel.
That's wonderful.
Well, this has been great. I appreciate all the info and insights here. I will also point our listeners to the TDI pieces. Of course, if you're a research client, there's a wealth of information to get to. If you're not a research client, maybe this is the motivation to get you there, but a lot of great data.
Agreed.
All right. Well, we are coming up on time, but thanks to the both of you for being back on. And we'll have to take a look at the next iteration, see whether or not some of these expectations we have and some of these trends get borne out in the actual data itself. Well, thank you both.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us. I mean, it's nice to talk to you. It's been a while.
Thanks, Eric. Always a pleasure to be on your podcast.
And great to have you on. And hey, we'll set a date to be able to pick up this next iteration of data. But that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Sophie Carr, Gary Sussman, and Kate Asplin on the marketing and events teams, and our agency partner, the 199. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're going to be swinging back into security. We'll be talking about the next generation of phishing attack, or really what's happening in what has been this complicated and difficult area of security, and what are things that organizations can do to look at and address these capabilities. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.